Margaret Chen walked into the office building at exactly 7:30 every morning. She carried the same brown leather bag her mother had given her 15 years ago. Her shoes made soft sounds on the tile floor. Most people never looked up when she passed by. The office of Westbridge Financial was a busy place. People rushed around with coffee cups and papers. They talked loudly on phones. They laughed at jokes by the water cooler. Margaret moved through all of this like she was invisible. She said good morning to people, but most of them just nodded or didn't hear her at all. Her desk was in the corner of the filing room. It was a small space with gray walls and metal cabinets that reached up to the ceiling. Margaret didn't mind. She liked the quiet. She liked organizing the papers and making sure everything was in the right place. For 15 years, this had been her job. She was good at it. The other workers called her different names when they talked about her. Some called her the quiet one. Others said the file lady or just what's her name from the back office. Nobody really knew much about Margaret. She didn't go to the Friday happy hours. She didn't join the office gossip sessions. She brought her lunch in a small container and ate alone at her desk, reading books from the library. Margaret had learned a long time ago that being invisible had its advantages. When people didn't notice you, they said things in front of you they wouldn't normally say. They left papers on their desks without thinking. They had phone conversations as if she wasn't there. Margaret heard everything. She saw everything, but she kept it all to herself. The office had 23 employees. Margaret knew all their names, even though most of them didn't know hers. There was Susan from accounting, who was having an affair with Tom from sales. There was David, who was looking for a new job because he hated his boss. There was Linda, who took credit for other people's work. Margaret knew all these things, but she never told anyone. Her job was simple. Companies sent documents to Westbridge Financial. Margaret organized them, filed them, and made sure they could be found when needed. She was very careful with her work. Every paper went in exactly the right place. Every file was labeled perfectly. In 15 years, she had never lost a single document. But Margaret's job was more than just filing papers. She also made copies of important documents for the managers. She scanned forms into the computer system. She noticed things in these papers, numbers that seemed wrong, names that appeared in strange places. She saw patterns that others missed. 3 months ago, something changed at Westbridge Financial. The old CEO, Mr. Patterson, retired. He was a kind man who remembered everyone's birthday. He knew Margaret's name and always thanked her for her good work. When he left, people cried at his goodbye party. Margaret stood in the back of the room and clapped politely. The new CEO was Richard Ashford. He was younger than Mr. Patterson, maybe 45 years old. He wore expensive suits and shiny watches. He talked fast and used big words. On his first day, he walked through the office shaking hands with everyone. When he got to Margaret, he looked at her for 2 seconds and said, "And you are?" Margaret told him her name. He nodded and moved on. She could tell he had already forgotten. Richard called meetings almost every day. He talked about synergy and optimization and maximizing shareholder value. The office workers didn't really understand what he meant, but they nodded and took notes. Margaret sat in the back during these meetings, writing down everything in her small notebook. After Richard arrived, the office changed. People became nervous. They worked longer hours. They competed with each other for Richard's attention. The friendly atmosphere disappeared. Now everyone was worried about their jobs. Margaret noticed other changes too. New papers started coming across her desk. Transfer forms, account statements, legal documents with complicated language. She filed them all carefully, but she also read them. The numbers didn't make sense. Money was moving in strange ways. Companies she had never heard of were receiving large payments. She started keeping a second set of files. Every time she saw something unusual, she made an extra copy. She took these copies home in her brown leather bag. At night, she spread them out on her kitchen table. She made notes. She drew connections. She created a map of where the money was going. Margaret had a secret. Everyone at the office thought she was just a simple file clerk with no education. But the truth was different. 10 years ago, Margaret had started taking night classes at the community college. She studied accounting. She studied business law. She studied finance. It took her 7 years, but she earned her degree. She never told anyone at work. She didn't need them to know. She just wanted to learn. Now those years of study were helping her understand what she saw in the documents. Richard Ashford was stealing from the company. He was moving money through fake companies. He was changing numbers in the reports. He was preparing to take millions of dollars and disappear. Margaret knew she had to be careful. If Richard discovered that she knew his secret, he might do something dangerous. So she waited. She collected more evidence. She made sure everything was documented and organized. She was patient like she had always been. The office workers still ignored her. They still walked past her desk without saying hello. They still forgot her name, but Margaret didn't care anymore. She had important work to do. She was protecting the company, even though nobody knew it. Every morning she came in at 7:30. Every evening she left at 5 o'clock. She filed papers and organized documents. She smiled politely when people walked by. She was invisible just like always, but now being invisible was part of her plan. Margaret watched Richard carefully. She saw how he treated people. He was rude to the secretary. He yelled at managers in meetings. He made jokes that weren't funny and expected everyone to laugh. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. He thought nobody could catch him, but he was wrong. Someone was watching. Someone was keeping track of everything. Someone understood exactly what he was doing. That someone was the quiet woman in the filing room, the one nobody ever noticed. Margaret Chen was ready. She just needed to wait for the right moment. That moment was coming soon. Margaret could feel it. The office was about to change in ways nobody expected, and the simple file clerk in the corner was going to be the reason why. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Margaret was organizing files when her computer made a sound. Everyone in the office got the same message at the same time. It was from Richard Ashford. The subject line said, "Important company announcement." Margaret opened it and read carefully. Richard was calling an all-hands meeting for 10 o'clock. Everyone had to attend. No exceptions. The message didn't say what the meeting was about, but Margaret had a feeling she knew. She had seen the documents. She knew what was coming. By 9:30, the office was full of worried whispers. People gathered in small groups talking quietly. Susan from accounting looked like she might cry. David kept checking his phone. Linda pretended to be calm, but her hands were shaking when she held her coffee cup. Margaret stayed at her desk. She listened to the conversations around her. People were guessing what the meeting would be about. Some thought it was good news, maybe bonuses or a new client, but most people feared the worst. There were rumors going around. Other companies were laying off workers. The economy wasn't doing well. Maybe Westbridge Financial was in trouble too. At 5 minutes before 10, everyone walked to the large conference room. It was the biggest room in the office with a long table and chairs around it. Not everyone could sit, so some people stood along the walls. Margaret found a spot in the back corner. She held her notebook and a pen. Nobody stood near her. There was empty space around her, like always. Richard walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. He wore a dark blue suit and carried a tablet. He didn't smile. He stood at the front of the room and looked at everyone. The room became completely silent. People barely breathed. "Thank you all for coming," Richard said. His voice was cold and professional. "I'll get straight to the point. Westbridge Financial is restructuring. We need to cut costs to stay competitive in the market. This means we have to make some difficult decisions." Margaret watched the faces around her. People looked scared now. Susan grabbed the hand of the person next to her. David closed his eyes. Linda's face went pale. "By the end of this month," Richard continued, "we will be reducing our workforce by 30%. Letters will go out this week informing affected employees. We appreciate your service to the company, and we'll provide severance packages according to your contracts." The room exploded with noise. People started talking all at once. Some people shouted questions. Others just stared in shock. A woman near the front started crying. Richard held up his hand for silence, but it took a long time for the room to quiet down. "I know this is difficult news," Richard said. He didn't sound like he cared at all. "But it's necessary for the company's survival. We're not the only firm making these changes. It's the reality of today's business world." Margaret's hand moved across her notebook. She wrote down his exact words. She noted the time. She watched how he stood, how he spoke, how he looked at people. He was lying. She knew the company wasn't in trouble. The money wasn't gone. Richard had stolen it and hidden it. These people were losing their jobs because of his theft. "Are there any questions?" Richard asked. He looked around the room with a bored expression. Nobody spoke. People were too shocked, too afraid. If you asked questions, maybe you would be first on the list to go. Everyone knew this, so they stayed silent. Margaret felt something inside her chest. It was anger, hot and strong. These were good people. They worked hard. They had families. They had bills to pay, and this man was destroying their lives to steal money. She had been patient for 3 months. She had collected evidence quietly. But now, watching Richard's fake performance, something broke inside her. She stood up. Her chair made a loud sound on the floor. Everyone turned to look at her. Many people seemed surprised. They had forgotten she was there. Richard looked at her with confused eyes. He clearly didn't remember who she was, yes? He said, "You have a question?" "I do," Margaret said. Her voice was steady and clear. "I've been looking at the financial reports. The numbers don't make sense. There are transfers to companies I've never heard of. Large amounts of money going out every month. Can you explain those?" The room went very quiet. People stared at Margaret. Nobody expected the quiet file clerk to speak up. Nobody expected her to talk about financial reports. Richard's face changed color. For just a second, he looked worried. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. "I'm sorry," he said in a voice that sounded kind but wasn't. "What's your name again?" "Margaret Chen. I work in the filing department." "Ah, yes, Margaret." He said her name like it was funny. "I appreciate your concern, but I think there's been a clerical misunderstanding. Financial reports can be complex. The transfers you're seeing are perfectly normal business operations. Consultants, contractors, that sort of thing. But these companies don't have websites," Margaret said. "I checked. And the amounts are very large. In the past 3 months, over $2 million has gone to these companies. That's a lot of money for consultants." Richard's smile disappeared. His face turned red. Other people in the room started looking interested now. Some of them took out their phones, probably to write down the company names Margaret mentioned. "Miss Chen," Richard said, and his voice was sharp now, "I think you need to stay in your lane. Your job is to file papers, not to analyze company finances. These are matters you don't understand. I suggest you stick to what you know." Margaret felt everyone watching her. The old Margaret would have sat down and been quiet. The old Margaret would have been embarrassed. But something had changed. She thought about all the people in this room who would lose their jobs. She thought about the evidence in her apartment. She thought about all the years she had been invisible. "I understand more than you think," she said quietly. Richard's eyes went cold. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, but it was a mean laugh. "Is that so? Well, let me make something clear to everyone here. We don't have time for conspiracy theories from file clerks. We're dealing with a serious business situation. Miss Chen, if you can't focus on your actual job, maybe you should be at the top of the layoff list." Some people gasped. Others looked down at the floor. Nobody defended Margaret. They were all too scared for their own jobs. Margaret looked around the room at all these faces. People she had worked with for 15 years. People who had never learned her name. People who were too frightened to speak up. She picked up her notebook and her pen. She put them in her brown leather bag. Then she walked toward the door. The crowd moved aside to let her through. Everyone watched her. The room was completely silent except for the sound of her shoes on the floor. When she reached the door, she stopped. She turned back to look at Richard. He was smiling again, thinking he had won. He had embarrassed her. He had threatened her. He expected her to go back to her desk and stay quiet like she always did. "You made a mistake," Margaret said. Her voice carried across the whole room. "You should have been more careful about who you underestimated." Then she walked out. The door closed behind her with a loud slam that echoed through the building. People would talk about that sound for years to come. The slam heard around the office. The moment everything changed, Margaret walked down the hallway to her desk. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. She had been patient for 3 months. She had collected evidence. She had been careful and quiet. But now it was time to act. Richard had made his choice. Now Margaret would make hers. She opened her desk drawer and took out a business card. It had been sitting there for 2 weeks. The card belonged to a lawyer on the board of directors. Margaret had met him once when she delivered some files to his office. He had been kind to her. He had asked her name and actually remembered it. He had given her his card and said to call if she ever needed anything. Margaret picked up her phone. It was time to make a call. It was time for the invisible woman to be seen. Margaret sat at her desk and dialed the number on the business card. Her fingers didn't shake. She had made her decision. There was no going back now. James Morrison speaking, a man's voice answered. Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Chen from the filing department at Westbridge Financial. We met 2 weeks ago when I brought documents to your office. There was a pause. Yes, Margaret. I remember. Is everything okay? You sound serious. I need to speak with you about something important. It's about the company, about Mr. Ashford. Another pause, longer this time. I see. Can you tell me what this is about? Margaret looked around her small office. The gray walls, the metal filing cabinets. This had been her space for 15 years. After today, everything would be different. I have evidence that Mr. Ashford is stealing from the company. I have documents. I need to show them to you and the board of directors. She heard Mr. Morrison take a breath. Those are serious accusations, Margaret. Are you certain? I'm certain. I've been documenting everything for 3 months. I have copies of all the evidence. Bank transfers, fake companies, forged signatures, everything. Where are you now? At my desk. Mr. Ashford just announced layoffs at the company meeting. 30% of the staff. But the company isn't in trouble. He's stealing the money and using the layoffs to cover it up. Stay where you are, Mr. Morrison said. His voice was urgent now. I'm going to make some calls. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Don't talk to anyone about this. Especially not Mr. Ashford. I understand. Margaret hung up the phone. She opened her filing cabinet and pulled out a large banker's box from the bottom drawer. She had been keeping it there just in case. Inside were folders organized by date. Each folder contained copies of suspicious documents, bank statements, transfer orders, emails she had found in the recycling bin, contracts with companies that didn't exist. She had worked on this collection for 3 months. Every evening, she took papers home and made copies. Every morning, she brought the copies back and hid them in this box. She organized everything by date and category. She made notes explaining what each document meant. She created a timeline showing how the money moved. Margaret also had something else, a small notebook where she had written down everything she observed. Times when Richard made phone calls and looked nervous. Dates when he stayed late in the office alone. Names of people he met with. She had been watching him the whole time and he never noticed. Nobody ever noticed Margaret. Her phone rang. It was Mr. Morrison. Margaret, I've spoken with 3 other board members. We want to meet with you immediately. Can you come to the boardroom on the 10th floor? Yes, I have all the evidence with me. Good, come now. We'll be waiting. Margaret picked up the banker's box. It was heavy. 15 years of files were heavy. She carried it through the office. People looked at her strangely. They had just seen her walk out of the meeting. Now she was walking through with a box. Some people probably thought she had been fired already. She took the elevator to the 10th floor. This was where the executives worked. Margaret had only been up here a few times to deliver important documents. The carpet was thick and soft. The furniture was expensive. Everything was quiet and clean. Mr. Morrison met her at the elevator. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. Margaret, thank you for coming. The other board members are in the conference room. Before we go in, I need to tell you something. What you're doing is brave, but it's also dangerous. If you're wrong, you could lose your job. If you're right, you're going against a powerful man. Are you sure you want to do this? Margaret looked at him directly. I'm sure. These people are about to lose their jobs because of his theft. Someone has to speak up. It might as well be me. Mr. Morrison smiled. Then let's go. The boardroom was enormous. A huge wooden table dominated the center. Large windows showed the city below. 5 people sat around the table. Margaret recognized them from company photos. These were the board of directors. The people who really owned Westbridge Financial. Everyone, this is Margaret Chen, Mr. Morrison said. Margaret, please have a seat and tell us what you've discovered. Margaret put the banker's box on the table. She took out the first folder. Her hands were steady. Her voice was clear. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times. 3 months ago, I noticed unusual transfers in the documents I was filing. Money was going to companies I had never seen before. I started paying attention. I made copies of everything. What I found is that Mr. Richard Ashford has been stealing from Westbridge Financial since the day he arrived. She opened the folder and laid out bank statements. These statements show transfers to 3 companies: Summit Consulting Group, Apex Strategic Partners, and Horizon Business Solutions. These companies don't exist. They have no websites, no physical addresses, no employees. They're fake companies created by Mr. Ashford. One of the board members, a woman with short white hair, leaned forward. How do you know they're fake? I researched them. I called the phone numbers listed. They're disconnected. I searched for their business registrations. They're registered to P.O. boxes. I looked up the names of the supposed owners. They don't exist. These are shell companies. Margaret pulled out more documents. In 3 months, Mr. Ashford has transferred $2.4 million to these fake companies. The money goes in and then disappears. I believe he's moving it to offshore accounts. Another board member, an older man with glasses, shook his head. This is hard to believe. Richard came with excellent references. He's a respected businessman. May I show you something else? Margaret asked. She took out another folder. Inside were emails. These are emails I found in the office recycling system. Mr. Ashford thought he deleted them, but they stay in the system for 90 days. In these emails, he discusses the plan with someone named Marcus Chen. They talk about moving money, creating the fake companies, and preparing to leave the country. She laid the emails on the table. The board members passed them around, reading carefully. Their faces became more serious with each page. There's more, Margaret said. She pulled out financial reports. These are the official reports Mr. Ashford presented to you. These are the real numbers from the company's accounts. Look at the differences. He's been showing you fake numbers to hide the theft. For the next hour, Margaret walked the board through everything. She showed them forged signatures on approval forms. She showed them how the money trail worked. She explained the timeline. She answered every question they asked. She had studied these documents so carefully that she knew every detail. The board members were shocked. They kept looking at each other, then back at Margaret. This quiet file clerk had done detective work that would impress the police. She had caught something they had all missed. Margaret, Mr. Morrison finally said, "You mentioned you have accounting training. May I ask about your educational background?" "I have a bachelor's degree in accounting from City Community College. I earned it through night classes over 7 years. I graduated 3 years ago." The white-haired woman blinked. "You have an accounting degree? Why are you working as a file clerk?" Margaret shrugged. "I like my job. I'm good at organizing things, and nobody pays attention to file clerks." That made it easier to notice what Mr. Ashford was doing. "Where is Richard now?" asked the man with glasses. "Still in the building, I think. The company meeting just ended." Mr. Morrison stood up. "We need to act immediately. Margaret, would you be willing to present this evidence to the police?" "Yes, and to testify if necessary." "Yes." He looked at the other board members. "We need to call an emergency meeting. We need to suspend Richard's access to all accounts immediately. And we need to contact the authorities." The white-haired woman nodded. "Agreed. But first I want to say something to Margaret." She looked directly at Margaret. "Thank you. What you've done took courage and intelligence. You saved this company. You saved people's jobs. We owe you a debt we can never fully repay." Margaret felt her face get warm. She wasn't used to praise. "I just did what was right." "That's more than most people would do," the woman said. The next 2 hours moved very fast. The board called the police. Officers arrived and listened to Margaret's presentation. They took the banker's box of evidence. They asked Margaret to write a detailed statement. She sat at a desk and wrote everything down, filling page after page with her neat handwriting. Meanwhile, the board called Richard to the boardroom. Margaret heard raised voices through the walls. Richard denied everything at first, but when they showed him the evidence, he became quiet. When the police arrived, he tried to run. Security stopped him at the elevator. Margaret watched through the glass walls as police officers led Richard out in handcuffs. He looked at her as they passed. His face was full of anger and disbelief. The invisible file clerk had destroyed him. The simple woman he had threatened and mocked had been the one to bring him down. Back in the boardroom, Mr. Morrison sat down next to Margaret. "The police want to work with the FBI on this. It's a major fraud case. They'll need your cooperation. I'll help however I can. You should also know that the board wants to offer you a different position. We need someone we can trust in our compliance department, someone who pays attention to details. someone with integrity. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, news trucks were parked outside Westbridge Financial. Reporters crowded the lobby, asking questions and taking pictures. The security guards had to lock the front doors to keep them out. Inside, employees gathered, in small groups talking in excited voices about what had happened. Margaret sat at her desk in the filing room trying to work, but it was impossible to concentrate. Every few minutes, someone came to her door. People she had worked with for 15 years suddenly wanted to talk to her. They asked questions. They congratulated her. They apologized for not knowing her better. Susan from accounting came by with tears in her eyes. "Margaret, I can't believe what you did. You saved my job. I have 3 kids. I don't know what I would have done if I lost this job." She hugged Margaret tightly. Margaret stood stiffly, not sure what to do. She wasn't used to hugs. David stopped by next. "I always thought you were just quiet," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I had no idea you were paying attention to everything. You're like a secret superhero." Margaret smiled a little. "I'm not a hero, I just notice things." "No," David said firmly. "What you did was brave. You stood up when nobody else would. That makes you a hero." Even Linda came by, though she looked uncomfortable. Linda had been one of the people who ignored Margaret the most. "I wanted to say thank you," Linda said quietly. "And I'm sorry. I should have been nicer to you all these years." Margaret didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded. Linda walked away looking ashamed. The phone on Margaret's desk rang constantly. The board wanted updates, the police had questions. The FBI called to schedule an interview. Mr. Morrison called to check on her 3 times. "Are you okay?" he kept asking. This must be overwhelming. It was overwhelming. Margaret had spent 15 years in quiet routine. Wake up, go to work, file papers, go home. The same thing every day. Now everything was chaos. Her small corner of the building that used to be ignored was suddenly the center of attention. At 4 o'clock, Mr. Morrison came down to her office himself. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. The news media wants to talk to you. They're calling you a hero. They want interviews." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. "I don't want to talk to reporters. I understand. But you should know that the story is going to be everywhere tonight. The board has issued a press release explaining what happened. We didn't use your name, but people inside the company are talking. Your name will get out." Margaret thought about this. She had always been private. She liked being invisible. The idea of being on television made her feel sick. "Can they make me do interviews?" "No, of course not. You have every right to privacy. I just wanted to prepare you. Your life is about to change." He was right. By 6 o'clock, Margaret's phone was ringing with calls from reporters. Somehow they had gotten her number. She didn't answer any of them. She turned off her phone and sat in the quiet of her office. At 7, when most people had gone home, Margaret finally packed her bag. She was exhausted. It had been the longest day of her life. As she walked toward the elevator, she saw a group of young employees still working. They saw her and started clapping. Then others joined in. Soon the whole floor was clapping and cheering. Margaret's face turned red. She waved awkwardly and hurried to the elevator. The doors closed on the sound of applause. She had never been applauded before. She wasn't sure she liked it. The next morning, Margaret's face was on the news. Someone had taken a photo of her at work and sold it to the media. The story was everywhere. File clerk exposes massive fraud. Quiet hero saves company. The woman nobody noticed. Margaret sat in her small apartment and watched the news with a cup of tea. They were talking about her like she was someone special. They were calling her brave and smart and heroic. It felt strange to hear these words about herself. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Margaret, I just saw you on the television." "Why? Didn't you tell me what was happening?" "I didn't want you to worry, Mom." "Worry, I'm proud. My daughter is a hero." Her mother's voice was full of excitement. "Everyone in my building is talking about you. Mrs. Wang from next door called me this morning. She said her son works at a bank and he wants to meet you." Margaret closed her eyes. This was exactly what she was afraid of. Everyone treating her differently, everyone wanting something from her. "Mom, I just did my job." "You did more than your job. You were brave. You stood up to a bad man. That's not easy." When Margaret got to work that day, there was a crowd of reporters outside the building. They shouted questions at her. Cameras flashed. Security guards had to help her get through the doors. Inside, employees lined the hallways. They clapped again. They wanted to shake her hand. They wanted to take pictures with her. Margaret felt trapped. She just wanted to get to her desk and do her work. But everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone had something to say. By lunchtime, she had a headache. She closed her office door, but people still knocked. Mr. Morrison called her to the boardroom again. This time, all the board members were there, plus lawyers and police officers. They needed Margaret to go through her evidence again. They asked her hundreds of questions. They needed to understand every detail for the criminal case against Richard. "We've recovered most of the money," one of the lawyers told her. "Thanks to your documentation, we knew exactly where to look. Mr. Ashford had opened accounts in the Cayman Islands. We're working with international authorities to freeze those accounts." A police detective leaned forward. "Miss Chen, you did professional-level investigative work. Have you considered a career in law enforcement?" Margaret shook her head. "No, thank you. I like my job." The detective smiled. "Well, if you ever change your mind, we'd love to have someone with your skills." After the meeting, Mr. Morrison walked Margaret back to her office. "I know this is hard for you," he said gently. "You're not someone who likes attention, but you need to understand something. What you did matters. You didn't just catch a criminal, you saved 230 jobs. Think about that. 230 families who won't lose their income, children who won't have to change schools, parents who won't lose their homes." Margaret stopped walking. She hadn't thought about it that way. She had been so focused on catching Richard that she hadn't considered the bigger picture. "I didn't think of it like that." "That's because you're humble, but those people know. That's why they're grateful. That's why they want to thank you." That evening, Margaret received a call from the board. They wanted to make an announcement. The layoffs were canceled. With the stolen money recovered, the company was actually in good financial shape. Nobody would lose their jobs. The next morning, when the announcement was made, the office erupted in celebration. People cried with relief. They hugged each other. They called their families with the good news, and they all thanked Margaret. Susan from accounting brought her flowers. David brought her a card signed by everyone on his floor. Even people Margaret had never met came to thank her. "You saved my job. You saved my house. You saved my family." Margaret listened to all of them. She accepted their thanks. And slowly she began to understand what Mr. Morrison had meant. She hadn't just done paperwork. She had changed people's lives. That was worth being uncomfortable for a while, but the attention didn't stop. Over the next few days, magazines wanted to do stories about her. A book publisher called offering a contract. A television show wanted her to appear as a guest. Companies called offering her jobs with huge salaries. Margaret said no to all of them. She didn't want to be famous. She didn't want to write a book. She just wanted to do her job. But she couldn't go back to being invisible. That part of her life was over. People knew her name now. They knew what she had done. They respected her. And whether she liked it or not, Margaret Chen was no longer the woman nobody noticed. The FBI investigation continued. Margaret had to testify before a grand jury. She sat in a formal room and told her story to a group of serious people. They asked her to explain how she had discovered the fraud. She walked them through every step. When she finished, the prosecutor shook her hand. "Miss Chen, you've made our job much easier. Most fraud cases take years to investigate. You handed us everything we needed." Richard Ashford was officially charged with 15 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The newspaper said he could face 20 years in prison. His lawyer tried to make a deal, but the evidence was too strong. There was no way to argue against Margaret's careful documentation. As the days passed, life at Westbridge Financial slowly returned to normal. People stopped crowding around Margaret's desk. The reporters moved on to other stories. The excitement faded, but things were different now. When Margaret walked through the office, people smiled at her. They said hello. They asked how she was doing. They invited her to lunch. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was valued. She belonged. And in her small office with the gray walls, Margaret continued to do what she had always done. She filed papers. She organized documents. She kept everything in perfect order. But now when she did her work, she knew that people were watching, not because they wanted to catch her making mistakes, but because they respected her. Because they had learned that the quiet person in the corner might be the most important person in the room. 2 weeks after Richard's arrest, Mr. Morrison called Margaret to his office. She took the elevator to the 10th floor, past the expensive furniture and thick carpets. She had been up here many times now. It didn't feel so strange anymore. "Margaret, please sit down," Mr. Morrison said. He looked tired but happy. "I wanted to talk to you about the position we offered. Chief Compliance Officer. Have you thought about it?" Margaret had thought about it every day. Chief Compliance Officer was an important job. She would make sure the company followed all the rules. She would watch for problems like Richard's fraud. She would protect the company and its employees. It was a big responsibility. "I have thought about it," she said carefully. "But I'm not sure I'm the right person." "Why not? You caught a fraud that nobody else saw. You documented it perfectly. You had the courage to report it. Those are exactly the qualities we need. But I've never been a manager before. I don't know how to lead people. I'm just a file clerk." Mr. Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, you're not just anything. And being a leader isn't about being loud or bossy. It's about being observant, careful, and honest. You have all those qualities. You've had them for 15 years. We just didn't notice." Margaret looked down at her hands. "If I take this job, things will be different. People will expect things from me. I won't be able to work quietly anymore." "That's true. But think about what you could do. You could create systems to prevent fraud. You could teach people to pay attention. You could make this company safer for everyone." Margaret thought about the 230 people who still had their jobs. She thought about Susan's 3 children. She thought about David's mortgage. She thought about all the families who were safe because she had spoken up. "Can I make some conditions?" "Of course. What do you need?" "I don't want my name in press releases. I don't want to be the face of anything. I just want to do the work." Mr. Morrison smiled. "Done. What else?" "I want to hire my own team. People who are careful and observant. People who notice things." "Absolutely. We'll give you a budget for staff. And I want to create a system where anyone in the company can report problems without being afraid. A way for people to speak up safely." "That's an excellent idea. We'll support that completely." Margaret took a deep breath. This was a big decision. Her life would change again. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. "Then I accept the position." Mr. Morrison stood up and shook her hand. "Welcome to the executive team, Margaret. I think you're going to change this company for the better." The next Monday, Margaret moved to a new office. It was on the 8th floor with windows that looked out over the city. The desk was big and made of real wood. There were bookshelves and a comfortable chair for visitors. It was nothing like her small corner in the filing room. Margaret stood in the middle of her new office and felt strange. This didn't feel like her. But then she remembered what Mr. Morrison said. She wasn't here to be comfortable. She was here to protect people. She could learn to work in a fancy office if it meant keeping people safe. Her first job was to hire a team. She interviewed dozens of people. She didn't look for people with impressive degrees or fancy experience. She looked for people who paid attention to details, people who asked good questions, people who cared about doing things right. She hired 5 people. There was James, a young man fresh out of college who noticed small errors that others missed. There was Patricia, an older woman who had worked in accounting for 30 years and knew every trick people used to hide money. There was Kevin, who was shy and quiet but incredibly good with computers. There was Rita, who had worked in human resources and understood how to talk to people. And there was Samuel, who had been a police detective before retiring and wanted to use his skills in the business world. Margaret's team was diverse and talented. But most importantly, they all shared one quality. They cared about the truth. They weren't interested in office politics or impressing executives. They wanted to make sure the company operated honestly. Together, they created new systems. They set up regular audits of all financial transactions. They created software that flagged unusual patterns in spending. They made rules about how money could be transferred and who had to approve large expenses. They built protection into every part of the company's operations. But Margaret's most important project was the anonymous reporting system. She called it the Speak Up program. Any employee could report concerns through a secure website. Reports went directly to Margaret's team, not to managers or executives. Every report was investigated seriously, and employees who reported problems were protected from retaliation. When Margaret announced the Speak Up program at a company meeting, people applauded. "We want everyone to feel safe reporting problems," Margaret told them. Her voice was still quiet, but now people listened carefully to every word. "You don't have to be an executive to notice when something is wrong. Every person in this company has valuable observations. We want to hear them." After the meeting, many people came up to Margaret. They thanked her for creating the system. Some of them admitted they had seen small problems over the years but were too afraid to say anything. Now they felt like they could speak up. Margaret also started teaching. Once a month, she held training sessions on ethics and compliance. She taught people how to recognize fraud. She showed them warning signs. She encouraged them to trust their instincts. "If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong," she told them. "Don't ignore that feeling. Report it." She used real examples from her investigation of Richard. She showed people how he had hidden his theft. She explained how she had caught him. People were fascinated. They asked many questions. They wanted to learn how to protect themselves in the company. Young employees especially seemed drawn to Margaret. They asked her for career advice. They wanted to know how she had learned so much. Margaret was surprised to find that she enjoyed mentoring. She liked helping people understand things. She liked seeing them become more confident and skilled. One young woman named Emily reminded Margaret of herself. Emily was quiet and worked in the data entry department. People often overlooked her. But Emily was smart and observant. She noticed patterns in data that others missed. Margaret asked Emily to join her team. Emily's eyes went wide with surprise. "Me, but I'm just in data entry. I don't have any special training." "You have something more important," Margaret said. "You pay attention. You notice things. That's the most valuable skill you can have." Emily accepted and became an important member of the compliance team. She found several small problems that could have become big problems if left alone. Margaret was proud of her. She saw herself in Emily, and she wanted to give Emily the chances she had never gotten when she was young. As months passed, Westbridge Financial changed. The culture became more open. People felt comfortable reporting concerns. Small problems were caught before they became big problems. Employees trusted that their voices mattered. Other companies heard about Margaret's work. Business magazines wrote articles about her compliance program. Other companies asked if they could copy her systems. Margaret always said yes. She wanted every company to protect its employees and operate honestly. People from other companies called her for advice. "How do you get employees to report problems?" they asked. Margaret's answer was always the same. "You have to create safety. People will only speak up if they know they won't be punished. And you have to actually listen to them. If someone reports a problem and nothing happens, they'll never report again." One day, Margaret received a special visitor. A woman from the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to her office. "Miss Chen, I'm Agent Sarah Martinez. I wanted to meet you in person. The case against Richard Ashford is going to trial next month. Your evidence is the foundation of our entire case. I wanted to thank you personally." "I'm glad I could help," Margaret said. "You did more than help. You did our job for us. You gathered evidence, documented everything, and built a timeline. Most investigators don't work as carefully as you did." Agent Martinez paused. "I also wanted to tell you something. Richard Ashford is pleading guilty. He knows he can't win against your evidence. He's going to prison for a long time." Margaret felt something in her chest. Relief maybe, justice. Good, he hurt a lot of people. Or he would have if he hadn't been stopped. He was stopped because of you. Don't ever forget that. After Agent Martinez left, Margaret sat at her desk and looked out the window at the city. She thought about how much her life had changed. A year ago, she was invisible. Nobody knew her name. Nobody valued her work. She went to her corner office, filed papers, and went home. Now she had a team. She had responsibility. She was making a difference. People respected her. They listened to her ideas. They asked for her advice, but the most important change was inside herself. Margaret no longer felt invisible. She no longer felt like she had to hide. She had learned that her quiet observation and careful work had value. She had learned that you didn't have to be loud to be powerful. You didn't have to demand attention to matter. Sometimes the most important people in a room were the ones nobody noticed. The ones who watched carefully, thought deeply, and acted when it mattered. Margaret had always been that person. Now everyone knew it. That evening, as Margaret prepared to leave work, Susan from accounting stopped by her office. "Margaret, a few of us are going out for dinner tonight. We'd love it if you came." The old Margaret would have said no. She would have made an excuse and gone home to eat alone. But the new Margaret was trying to be different. She was trying to accept friendship and connection. "I'd like that," she said. "What time?" Susan's face lit up with a smile. 7 o'clock at Antonio's restaurant. "See you there." Margaret went home and changed into nicer clothes. She put on a little makeup. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked the same as always. But she felt different. She felt seen. She felt valued. She felt like she belonged. At dinner, Margaret sat with Susan, David, Linda, and several other colleagues. They talked and laughed. They asked Margaret about her new job. They told stories about their families. They included her in the conversation like she had always been part of the group. Margaret realized something. These people weren't being nice to her because she was a hero. They were being nice because they liked her. They wanted to know her. They valued her as a person, not just for what she had done. For the first time in 15 years, Margaret felt like she had friends at work. She felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself. It was a good feeling. 2 years had passed since the day Margaret walked out of that company meeting and changed everything. The office of Westbridge Financial looked the same on the outside. Same building, same logo, same address. But inside, everything was different. Margaret walked through the hallways now, and people smiled at her. They stopped to chat. They asked her opinions. They told her about their weekends and their families. The invisible woman had become visible, and she had learned to live with it. Her compliance team had grown to 12 people. They worked in a suite of offices on the 8th floor. The walls were covered with charts showing financial flows, audit schedules, and risk assessments. But there was also a cozy area with comfortable chairs where team members could talk and share ideas. Margaret had learned that good work happened when people felt comfortable. The Speak Up program had received over 300 reports in 2 years. Most were small things: expense account errors, scheduling conflicts, misunderstandings about policies. But some were serious. Margaret's team had caught 2 cases of sexual harassment. One manager who was falsifying sales numbers, and one employee who was stealing office supplies to sell online. Every report was investigated. Every person who reported something was protected, and every problem was solved. People trusted the system because it worked. They saw that speaking up made a difference. Other companies had started copying Westbridge Financial's model. Margaret received calls every week from businesses wanting advice. She always made time to help them. She believed that every company should protect its employees and operate with integrity. Business schools started teaching case studies about Margaret's work. Students studied how she had caught Richard's fraud and how she had built the compliance program. Margaret was invited to speak at conferences and universities. At first, she had been terrified of public speaking, but over time she got better at it. She learned to share her knowledge in a way that helped others. One spring morning, Mr. Morrison called Margaret to his office. He was retiring after 40 years with the company. "I wanted to talk to you before I leave," he said. "The board has asked me to recommend my replacement." "I'm recommending you?" Margaret stared at him in shock. "Me, as CEO?" "Yes. You've transformed this company, Margaret. You've created a culture of honesty and accountability. You've shown that doing the right thing is also good for business. Our employees are happier. Our clients trust us more. We've grown every quarter since you became Chief Compliance Officer. You're the natural choice. But I don't know anything about running a company. I've only been an executive for 2 years. You know the most important thing, how to lead with integrity. Everything else can be learned. Mr. Morrison smiled. Will you at least think about it? Margaret thought about it for a week. Being CEO would mean even more responsibility, more attention, more pressure. She would have to make difficult decisions that affected hundreds of people. It was scary. But she also thought about what she could do as CEO. She could make integrity the foundation of everything the company did. She could prove that businesses could be both successful and ethical. She could show other companies a better way. She accepted the position. The announcement made news around the country. From file clerk to CEO, the Margaret Chen story. Reporters wanted to interview her again. This time, Margaret agreed to a few interviews. She had learned that sharing her story could inspire others. If her experience helped even one person find the courage to speak up, it was worth the discomfort. In the interviews, Margaret was honest and humble. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I just did what needed to be done. Anyone could have done the same thing." The real lesson is that every person in a company has value. Every person sees things from their unique position. Companies need to listen to all their employees, not just the executives. On her first day as CEO, Margaret held a company-wide meeting. She stood in front of everyone, just as Richard had done 2 years earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different. People looked at her with respect and trust, not fear. "I know many of you remember the last time we had a meeting like this," Margaret began. Her voice was still quiet, but now it carried authority. "That day, we were told that 30% of us would lose our jobs. That day we learned that our CEO was stealing from us. That was one of the darkest days in our company's history." The room was completely silent. People remembered. Some of them still had nightmares about that day. "But we survived," Margaret continued. "We survived because we chose integrity over profit. We chose to do the right thing even when it was hard. We chose to listen to every voice, even the quiet ones. And we're stronger now than we've ever been." She paused and looked around the room. "I promise you this. As long as I'm CEO, this company will always operate with honesty and integrity. We will always value every employee. We will always listen when someone speaks up. And we will never forget the lessons we learned." The room erupted in applause. It lasted for 5 minutes. People stood and cheered. Some cried. Margaret felt tears in her own eyes. These were her people now. Her responsibility. Her family. Under Margaret's leadership, Westbridge Financial continued to grow and prosper. But Margaret measured success differently than most CEOs. Yes, profits mattered. Yes, the company needed to be financially healthy. But Margaret also looked at other numbers. Employee satisfaction, ethical compliance reports, community impact, long-term sustainability. She started new programs. Westbridge Financial began mentoring young people from underprivileged backgrounds, teaching them business skills. The company committed to environmental responsibility. Margaret instituted a profit-sharing program so that when the company did well, every employee benefited, not just executives. Margaret also made sure the company never forgot its history. She kept her old desk from the filing room and displayed it in the lobby with a plaque that read, "This desk belonged to Margaret Chen, who worked as a file clerk for 15 years. From this desk, she saw what others missed and had the courage to speak up. Every employee at Westbridge Financial has valuable insights. We listened to all of them." Young employees would stop and look at that desk. They would read the plaque. They would understand that they mattered, no matter what their job title was. The board of directors created an annual award in Margaret's honor, the Margaret Chen Integrity Award. Every year, one employee was chosen for demonstrating exceptional ethics and courage. The winner received a cash prize and recognition at the company meeting. But more importantly, they received Margaret's personal mentorship for a year. Emily, Margaret's former protege, won the award in the third year. She had uncovered a vendor who was overcharging the company. Instead of ignoring it, she had reported it through the Speak Up program. The company saved hundreds of thousands of dollars. Emily was now a senior compliance analyst and was being considered for a management position. "You taught me to trust my instincts," Emily told Margaret when she received the award. "You showed me that speaking up is not just okay, it's necessary." "You changed my life," Margaret hugged her. "You changed your own life. I just gave you the opportunity." 5 years after becoming CEO, Margaret received a letter. It was from a woman named Jennifer, who worked as a receptionist at a company in another state. Jennifer wrote, "I saw your interview on television. You said that every person in a company has value, even the ones nobody notices. I want you to know that your words gave me courage. I noticed my boss was treating female employees inappropriately. I was scared to say anything because I'm just a receptionist. But I remembered what you said. I reported it. They investigated. My boss was fired. 3 women told me I saved them from harassment. I wanted to thank you for showing me that my voice matters." Margaret kept that letter on her desk. She received many letters like it over the years. People from all over the country who had been inspired by her story. People who had found the courage to speak up because she had spoken up first. Sometimes Margaret thought about Richard Ashford. He was in federal prison serving 15 years. She didn't feel anger toward him anymore. Mostly she felt sad. He had been smart and capable. He could have done so much good. Instead, he chose to steal and lie. His life was wasted, but his crime had created an opportunity. It had revealed Margaret's talents. It had shown that integrity mattered more than anything else. It had taught everyone that the person who seems least important might be the most important of all. On the 10th anniversary of the Door Slam, as it was now called, the company held a special celebration. Employees from all over came to the main office. Reporters covered the event. Local politicians gave speeches. Everyone wanted to honor the day that changed everything. Margaret stood at the front of the room, older now but still herself. Still quiet, still careful, still humble. 10 years ago, I walked out of a meeting and slammed a door, she said. I didn't know what would happen. I just knew I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let a bad man hurt good people. She looked at the faces in the crowd. So many of them were still here. Susan, who now ran the accounting department. David, who had been promoted to vice president of sales. Linda, who had become a better person and a valued team member. Emily, who was now director of compliance. All the people whose lives had been saved that day. But the real story isn't about me, Margaret continued. It's about all of you. It's about choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard. It's about speaking up when you see something wrong. It's about valuing every person and every voice. That's what makes a company great. That's what makes a community strong. That's what makes us who we are. She paused and smiled. I was invisible for 15 years. I was overlooked and ignored. But I was also watching and learning and preparing. When the moment came, I was ready. My message to all of you is this. You never know when your moment will come. But when it does, be ready. Be brave, be true to yourself. The world needs people who will stand up for what's right. The applause was thunderous. People stood and cheered. Some held up signs that said, "Thank you, Margaret." Others waved handkerchiefs. The celebration lasted all day, with speeches and awards and music and food. But at the end of the day, when everyone else had gone home, Margaret stood alone in the empty lobby. She looked at her old desk with its plaque. She thought about the scared woman who had sat there for so many years. The woman nobody noticed. The woman who kept her head down and stayed quiet. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who had changed hundreds of lives simply by refusing to stay silent. Margaret had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the smallest voice can make the loudest difference. Sometimes the person who seems weakest is actually the strongest. Sometimes the hero is the one nobody expected. She had been invisible for so long, but she had never been unimportant. Her quiet work, her careful observation, her moral courage, these things had always mattered. It just took time for everyone else to see it. Margaret turned off the lights in the lobby and walked to her car. Tomorrow would be another day of work. There would be meetings and decisions and problems to solve. There would be people counting on her. There would be challenges and opportunities, but she was ready. She had always been ready. The simple woman from the filing room had become a CEO, a leader, and an inspiration. But in her heart, she was still the same person, someone who paid attention, who cared about doing right, and who believed that every voice deserved to be heard. As she drove home through the city streets, Margaret felt at peace. She had found her purpose. She had made a difference. And she had learned that you don't need to be loud or powerful or noticed to matter. You just need to be true to yourself and brave enough to act when the moment comes. The door slam heard around the office had echoed far beyond that one building on that one day. It had echoed through time, inspiring countless others to find their own courage. And it would keep echoing long after Margaret was gone, reminding people that heroes come in all forms, even in the quiet woman filing papers in the corner whom nobody thought to notice.